college dana taku mon speculana na hipcha na ija na iwogla kapi ash Lakota mon blecha glashka yimachana bakbawashte mata ash Wichagana kapisha Wichowoyake tel macha Nika Sloyaye Sece traki Wichiwoyake garina ake lana monspeki lana iwogla
Ehanni left. How many say Ehanni or step? How many use that? That's a contemporary European lifestyle taken it literally. Lakota, you say Ehanni lachchi is the right word saying good morning. Lakota, Leli Wachima, Ishila Wanachamahim, Dakota must be the Chalishka. Akashi, Wagla tik tekstoid. Lakota, so you have Lakota Lakota. Turn on your Lakota, turn that switch on so you can understand and speak it so you can make it through the day. So what you have to Lakota. Akashi la Kanka came to I bet you was there, Sunny and God, you can call Kenicha. When I bet you often come, Wichiwoyake, if you try to walk, then go to it and you took me. Now, okay, I bet you was doing it, they will come to have a car. Open the hedge and car. I bet you open the dog or kind of chunk to the Nalak and the last stick there. You come with you know, give her the hedge. I have the use of car after I should tell the job. Don't know you that got no one speech shock that Nakota be. The no one should check. We check lost and check out. I don't know one speech you learn a good check. That is a check and check. You peer that who give us on spoke joke that I should do the law. You don't come out that country. Near change, you are contracted to each other law. We don't agree. Awesome.
Michael Moore and I'm from Sitting Bull College, and there's a group of three of us that are going to talk about stories. That's, of course, the theme of our session, Wichiwoyake, and each one of us is going to kind of address a different aspect of stories, but of course we all share the common understanding that stories are the core of Lakota, Dakota, Nakota culture, that, you know, our parents, our grandparents, and all of the various elders share and pass on that knowledge through the stories that they tell, and that conveys the worldview, the values, and so on. And so that's why we individually use stories in our classrooms as well, to help convey those kinds of things to our students. And the three of us are going to kind of, again, address different aspects. So Lavella Moore, my wife here, will be talking about kind of some of the lessons that she's developed for working with younger students, particularly she's worked with Head Start students for many, many years, and now teaches at the college as well. But she's going to be talking about for the Head Start and grade school kinds of things. And then I'll be talking about some of the kinds of historical documents and recordings and things like that in the language that I use in my college classes at Sitting Bull College. And Helene will be sharing a story as well from her own tradition to again show the importance of the living aspects of the tradition as they're still shared to this very day. And we keep trying to get Helene to go first so she can get a chance to talk, but she keeps wanting us to start. So hopefully we'll get all the way through it. But if you were here before, we're going to each do something a little different than we did before. So yeah, everyone that's new will still get something good, and everyone that was here before will actually hear a little bit of different stories and things like that. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce my wife, Wichowoyake. More.
Hello, my name is More. I'm from Bullhead, South Dakota. I've been teaching Head Start since 1994. And then I moved to elementary for a couple of years, and then until 2011, did the LEAP program, and that helped me learn the Lakota language. And I knew it, I just didn't know how to put myself in it. So after completing the LEAP, I went back to Head Start and then worked on just doing nothing but Lakota language lessons. It was a little difficult, but I usually start by listening to stories. And so depending on what time of year it is, like January is just do story time. From September up to that point, usually I have the kids build the vocabulary, so you have like just the basics, you know, the emotions, animals, stuff like that. So with this one, this introduced animals, you know, as part of the thing. So the Great Race we did, and Gabe Blackmoon helped me translate the story into Lakota, and then as part of our oral tradition, I created like little, what do you call it? Winter count pictures to help stimulate what's happening in these pictures. And then we have the Lakota words to match with it. So I usually sit on the floor. I forgot a few of other stuff, but I usually have like a buffalo roll made out of grocery bags. I don't know if you ever did that. You crinkle them up, you let them dry, you cover it with contact paper, and then you put your Velcro stuff on it, and that way these will stick to it. And then so we usually start with the story, and I usually go step by step. I don't tell the whole story. We just do a few at a time. That way we build activities to help reinforce what's happening in the story. So in the beginning, again, this is I use that book for reference. So for this one, like I said, it introduces animals as part of this theme, and the story has a lot of science in it, and as well as categorizing things in there. So we start with categorizing animals, and so human, and then animals, and then you have who, Hunicha, and Hunupa, and Hudopa. So we start sorting those, and then so I ask them the doctors, they have to tell me which category it goes in. And that would be our daily activity. So every day, like I said, we don't go through the whole story, we just build on it every day. So the first part, like, we did the categorizing, and then for their activity, they sorted out little pictures, and they had to put it where Hunicha and Hunupa and Hudopa. And then as well, like we usually do 2 activities a day to keep them busy. And then they started their buffalo here, and there's the bagpipe. And then these are the winter cow pictures that went with that, this part of the story. The next day, we did how they all started gathering and decided whose side they were going to be on. Either they're going to be the Hunupa or the Hudopa. And then who they picked for their own stuff. So Microsoft, a Word document, I use PowerPoint, and I use, what's the other one called? There's another one. I use those because each one, you can do certain things to it. You can either copy paste, not all of them can copy and paste on her, the other program will. So I was transferring things from here to there. Usually I have like 3 programs going at the same time. And I have the children, in the beginning of the year, I always take a picture in the front view, and then I have them do the side view. Because you can add them in their activities throughout the year. So as you see this one, they have their face, they just glue their face on there, and then put the body parts together. So by that time, they already know what their body parts are, so we did activities to work with that part. We have games that do the body parts for them. And a lot of it's just cutting and gluing. And up here, you see up here, they have to cut out, their pieces are already cut out, but they have to make like a diorama, is that what it's called? So they have like a bigger piece of paper and they have to glue these on it, but they have to color their sky, make their mountains, and make the ground. And then put the pieces that match the story. The next day, some of the animals, they couldn't run or do the whole thing. So a lot of them dropped out of the race. So we talked about how there's different types of birds out there, how they live in trees. So they glued these animals, we talked about these animals, and then as a cutting activity, they have to take construction paper and they snip at them, and they glue it on the branches. The other activity was they categorize what each animal can do. So like some animals can run, some are slow, right, with snakes in them, and then some that can fly. So again, they're categorizing their animals that they're learning about. And it goes with these 2, which are covered. The next day we keep going. So then this one talked about how some animals, again, categorizing, and we're towards the end of the story, right? And so this one, you're categorizing the ones who can swim and the ones who burrow. And then there's a story where since the magpie won for the human, and who knew but we now can eat the buffalo. So this one is a story about how they do the buffalo hunt. So we did that story, what happens in a buffalo hunt, and they have to put them in order. And at the end, you can find, again, this is going back to the constellation stories that we did earlier. There's the great races in the sky, so we have that, and they put the glitter on for the great race in that, and that's red, right? Because the ground is red, that surrounds the sun. And then so in my learning areas, I have, it makes me, I kind of wonder, I feel like my kids don't listen until they go out in learning areas, and that they do what we're talking about in the stories all by themselves, and I know they're listening. So this child did that. He went around and put all the animals on a racetrack. I'm like, oh my God, they're getting it. And so my library would have all the different types of animals. Mostly animal books and puzzles and stuff in the areas. I can find more areas. And that's all I have. Try not to talk too fast, but not too fast. I couldn't find all my pieces. I have a lot of pictures on my other computer. I mean, like I said, I have a taught since 2015 for Head Start. I've been working at the college since then. But I kind of missed it. I miss all the kids. And I wish, I want to go back, but I don't know if I can handle sitting on the floor all day. It's hard to get up from the floor now. But there's like more stuff I haven't really gotten to yet. But I'm planning to have a curriculum activity book That's the one I could not find. Remember the, like, storage, you have these little animals? That's the one bird I can never find anywhere. I was looking at it. Yeah, because I have all those other birds where you squeeze it and it makes a noise. So that was the one that I couldn't find with the magpie. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you. Thanks for all coming.
So I got Lavella to teach at the college level. So she moved from elementary to college, and so now she's creating new lessons and just coming up with some really wonderful stuff. Maybe afterwards, if you come up and ask her, she might show you one of my favorite lessons. They were working with how you convey time in Lakota using different time phrases. And so she came up with this story based around Chapunka, right? The little mosquito that's traveling around looking for something to do. He wants to play, and so he visits with all these different animals as he's flying around, and asks each one, if they want to play, and each one has an excuse for what they're doing at that time, right? And that they can only play at a certain time. And so in the structure of the language, they're getting all these different time phrases kind of repeated throughout the course of the lesson. And then, of course, she needed voices, so I got stuck doing all of the other animals. She's Chapunka, and then I have to be, Chatranka and Bispiza and Mashle or Yashle, and just all these different animals. And of course, I have to get into it, so I have to create different voices for each animal. And my favorite was the buffalo bull. So, I kind of growling around, saying all these things in Lakota. And the students just laugh when they see that, and they tease me about, hearing my buffalo voice. Can you say it in your buffalo voice? And also at the time she was doing it, she was kind of watching, current events, and so this buffalo bull has a pair of pants stuck on the horn, if you guys know the story behind that. So, all right. So, if you weren't here for the first part, I talked about some of the historical collections that are out there, not generally in Native communities, but out in museums that a lot of people don't know about, where people were out, in the communities recording elders or interviewing elders, working with interpreters, and a lot of those things were written in Lakota. And so it's been kind of the goal of mine to bring those kinds of things back to the communities. Bring them back to Sitting Bull College, have them as a repository there, and then start sharing them with other communities as we can. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today, or share some of those kinds of stories in those collections with you. And we were kind of already looking at one in the previous session, and there were several requests to kind of continue with that. So I'm just going to kind of pick up in the middle of what we were talking about. And I was just reminded, by the way, at the end, if you want to come up and look at Lavella's stuff for her unit on the Great Race, you're welcome to do that at the end if I forget to mention that later. So what we were looking at just in the earlier session was some documents that were collected by Stanley Vestal, or Walter Campbell was his real name. Vestal was his writing name. And he wrote this biography of Sitting Bull back in 1932, which I think is still the best biography of Sitting Bull, because he recognized the bias at the time in the historical, books and things like that, where Sitting Bull was always portrayed by these non-Indian writers, of course, in a negative light. And so he wanted to understand Sitting Bull and write about Sitting Bull from a cultural perspective. And to do that, he felt he needed to interview the people that knew Sitting Bull personally, or even the people that, fought against Sitting Bull. He even went to Crow and interviewed Crows and other tribes as well. And all to have kind of a really robust or full view of Sitting Bull from, a cultural perspective. And in the process, he also wanted those things in the native language. And so he would work with particular interpreters to actually collect those stories and write them down. And so at Standing Rock, he worked with a man by the name of Robert Heigl. And I think I have another picture of him coming up in this slide set, so you'll get to see what Heigl looks like. And so he was, he had gone to Hampton Institute as a young man and learned to read and write English, and he also learned to read and write Lakota. And so he would go and interview these elders, and then he would write down their stories. And so I mentioned that a lot of you, if you're familiar with Vestal's work, it's just the published books, which are all in English. But he has this whole collection of his papers at the University of Oklahoma, which include ledger drawings, like you see here, and include all of these handwritten or typescript texts in Lakota, some of which have not been translated as of yet. Some are, and then he has notes on those, and that's what he used as the basis for writing the book. So he would work with the interpreter, Robert Heigl, to understand what was being explained to him in Lakota. And he spent about 4 summers traveling on the northern plains, most of the time at Standing Rock, but he visited Pine Ridge, Cheyenne River, went up into Canada to a number of the reserves up in Canada. He went to Montana, to the Crow Reserve, Blackfoot, and so on, just to interview, again, people that knew Sitting Bull. And so, so there's just a variety of different kinds of documents like that that are really, really fascinating. And so the stuff that I've been working with a lot is Heigl stuff from Standing Rock. And this is an example of that kind of a document. What I've done, of course, is to transcribe the handwritten form as you see up here. And this, I think, is the last slide that we were looking at in the previous session. And this is Sitting Bull's son, or his adopted son, One Bull, who's narrating to his granddaughter, who could also write in the language, and she was writing down and then mailing off to Vestal various questions that he was asking. And what he was particularly interested in this particular case are these images that Sitting Bull drew, right? A ledger book that has his different deeds. And so this was the one that we ended with, which is what Sitting Bull considered his bravest deed, which was a fight with a Crow leader in which both of them are wounded. And I was just mentioning at the end of the last session that, he's representing this particular event very much like we would take a selfie today with our cell phones in an important moment in our lives that we want to share with other people, right? And so, you see him dressed in the particular regalia of Chontet Iza Kolakichi. He was an officer in that Strongheart Society. And so he has that Strongheart headdress with the buffalo horns. And he also has the sash, right? You can see in red that's over his shoulder and kind of hanging down. And that group of 4 officers that had those sashes, they had the responsibility if the battle was going poorly and they were getting kind of pushed back by the enemy to jump off their horses and stake themselves to the ground by using that sash and a lance. And so he was one of those officers at that time that was a sash bearer. And so again, this is an important moment in his life, representing a form of leadership and obviously bravery. And of course, in this event, he killed the Crow, but the Crow wounded him as well. And this was the wound that made him limp for the rest of his life. So it went through his leg and caused a permanent limp. And so we had just read this in Lakota. So I'm not going to reread it. I'll go to the next one. We'll talk about the next little story here. So I think these are really important examples of life history stories, right? Where an individual is sharing, aspects of their life that were culturally important at the time. So this particular one is another very important event in Sitting Bull's life that represents an act of compassion on his part as they were, engaged in a fight with a group of enemies, the Assiniboine, up on the Missouri River near the mouth of the Yellowstone, so up near the Montana-North Dakota border. And this happened in 1856-57 when he was 26 years old. And so one bull explains it this way. He says, Waziata minishoshe okijate el hohe ob kichizapi. Unkawa hinkbe ejela om kichizapi. Hohe hokshila kile waniatu ake dopashniki ake zapta wahechetu. Ktepik te ki lehant khathanka iotake ikhuni. So that, happened upon this group and we're fighting with them, and Sitting Bull was coming upon this young man here. So here's the hohe, here's Sitting Bull again. You can see he's chontet iza, the headdress, carrying the lance, which he's going to come coup with. Echel hohe hokshila kile chie lina thankiyota ke yuzina yonke. So Nakota is understandable, right, for Lakotas, and so he understood when this boy called him older brother. And it moved him because he didn't have an older brother of his own. And so he, again jumps off his horse and he embraces the boy. Ish a yus na sumkaku niche ki let's see. Sumkai ktechi heche cha esha ktepi ktechi. Khathanka iotake thakolaki hana okia pina ktepishni. Heche khathanka iotake hokshila ki ichach ki na echel kichik tepi. So he, adopted him and he raised him as his own, as a younger brother actually. And that's the natural photograph of the young man right there. And he would receive Sitting Bull's father's name, which was Tatanka Psicha, or Jumping Bull, right? And so that's how that name got passed on to this new member of the family. I was going to apologize for the screen. We have no control over these projectors, so I can't improve the quality. I apologize. Wichiwoyake ichutka nikiglewichaya. Hokshila kile koshkalaka el heon etaha hoye ki ob olakotayapelo. So it was important, of course, in bringing peace with the hohe, with the Assiniboine. Wichasha washte ichacha chahe on yunki he on khathanka iotake oniha kuapelo. I might mention too that Jumping Bull stayed with his brother for the rest of his life, and he also has a book of his deeds when he would accompany Sitting Bull. And of course that was passed on in the family. And then the day that Sitting Bull was killed, was assassinated on December 15th, 1890, his brother was there and he died there as well. And his surviving family members, his wife and his children, carried the Jumping Bull name on, and they moved to Pine Ridge. And of course that's how the Jumping Bull name comes to be associated with Pine Ridge. I once met Kelvin Jumping Bull, visiting with him, and he said, I probably own half of Standing Rock because of all of the airship lands, right, that have been passed on. He's got a ton of airship lands. They're probably all only little tiny pieces of land. He kind of would joke about that. This is another important event in his life. This was the occasion of his father's death. And this took place just shortly after that, in 1858-59. And this was near what's now New England, North Dakota. There's a big butte there called Magajupaha, or Rainy Butte. And so that's what one bull is describing here. And the image is associated with that event as well. By the way, the titles up on the top are the names of the winter count year from Ukpapa winter count for that particular year. So I use that as the time reference, right, for all of these different dates. So one bull describes it. He says, "Chante oju wakpa winkpa el mahajupaha el tchanka psicha kamri wichasha nata ahi tcha kuwa awichayapi." So now here he's actually talking about when the father still had the name Jumping Bull. Okay, So before he passed it on to the new son, he's still known by Jumping Bull. So this is a reference to Sitting Bull's father. Now, Ajiki Chi, Iagi Chichbaya Esha Tchatchankap Sicha Mila O Chapchapchapina Ktepi. So in the fighting, the crows killed his father. He was stabbed. And in the stories that are in the book and that are in the documents, which I don't have up here, his father, of course, was an older man by this time. He'd been born back in the 1790s, right? So he's in his 60s, and he had been suffering from a horrible toothache and decided that it was better to die bravely on the battlefield than to suffer, through old age with the pains of old age. And so he had talked previously about, if he had a chance, he would go out and fight on the battlefield. And when the crows attacked their camp at this time, that's why he went out and ended up losing his life. So that's what they're talking about there. So the Lakotas were able to, the crows surprised them, but they were able to drive the crows away. And when they fled, they left their women and children. So this was a crow camp that just happened to be passing by, discovered the Lakotas, attacked them, and then the Lakotas drove them off, and the men fled, leaving their women behind. So Hana Wayaka Awicha Glipi Na Tathanka Iotake Upi. So all of the crow women that were captured were taken to Sitting Bull. And the drawing that you see there is from his uncle Fourhorns' book of Sitting Bull's deeds. So we have two different books, one by Sitting Bull and then another by his uncle recording these deeds. And you can see here that Sitting Bull again has the chontet, is a headdress on, and there's a crow warrior kind of right down here in the foreground that's he's fighting with, and then there's three women that Sitting Bull is capturing at that point. So he was among those that captured some of these women that the warriors left behind. Now we chak te bichimpi asha kathanka iotake jal chinshni na he. Tayan we cha yuhapo hena nipiktelo. Ate we cha we chunt e kinhet chacha uvinat elo. So, everyone kind of expected that he would, kill these captured crows because of the way he felt about his father being killed. But, what he says is, my father was a man, he expected his death. So, we're going to let these people live. And of course, what he did was mount them on his best horses with food and deliver them back to their people. So again, an example of compassion from a warrior is the value that's represented in this particular deed. That's a picture of the butte where this took place. So the Lakota camp was down by the head of the creek, down in the bottomlands, kind of over here, and that's Rainy Butte in the background there. So his father was presumably buried somewhere near the butte. Heche oas in zania tra oyate pi ikta kiga. So they were sent back to their people. Let's see. Probably what's the time? Okay, 11:04. I'm going to skip some of these. I could go on for days, so I'm going to skip some of this stuff. Gotta let Helene talk too. This particular one I really think is important. A lot of the older stories, they include accounts of visions and the kinds of songs and power that individuals receive through the visions. And so this is an example of one of those. This is one bull describing, he was asked by Stanley Vestal through the mail, right? Vestal wrote a letter asking about Sitting Bull's participation in the Sundance. And so, one bull would then recite that, and his granddaughter would write it down, and then it would be mailed, right? So a lot of these are going through the mail back and forth between Vestal and one bull's family. So one bull is talking about Sitting Bull's participation in the Sundance. So he says, Shotoju paha ejiapi ki haikiala iwioch beata hehantu thanka iotake wiwangwa chipi. So, he danced at this place called Smoky Butte. And the drawings, by the way, are by two people who knew Sitting Bull personally and were members of the same band. The top one is by Eagle Shield, and the bottom one by Jaw, both of whom lived at Standing Rock, settled at Standing Rock, and lived in the Bullhead community where my wife and I are living. So then he says, Ake, so again, another time, Unjijint kawak el ia owapilawa yongek el ruangwa chipi. So the other time that he danced was at this place where there are, markings on the rocks. And of course, this is over on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation today in Montana. He says, wana Wichowoyake leho Wichowoyake wakatahanach uncha wakal irtuan. So he hears a voice as he's dancing, right, about noon. Lena nuche wanicha pelo eitin echa washichulak pagaltakya upi. So he hears that these have no ears, and he sees these washichus, these soldiers, falling upside down. Couldn't find a picture, so I just took one and turned it over like that. Shugakhai igalotakapy. They were on their horses, these soldiers. Shukoakanki ko paunziosla upi. Oyatekin Wichiwoyake. Hetan petu ake nupa chanki aha pehinhaska natan hiupi. Right, so about 2 weeks after this is when Custer's men came and attacked with the little bighorn. So this is the well-known vision that he receives, that prophecies the victory that they'll have over these soldiers, that little bighorn. And then he kind of goes on to talk about the little bighorn battle. So he says, now, Wichowoyake ejiapiwang. So he refers to this well-known event where a young boy, a teenage boy, was going back along the trail from the camp looking for strayed horses, and the soldiers came upon him and they killed him. Right? So that's what he's talking about there. So he's talking about when Reno's command attacked the south end of the camp where the Hunkpakos were, not far from Sitting Bull's lodge, and they started, shooting into the camp. So as the soldiers are attacking and firing in the camp, of course the women and the children are fleeing to the northward. And the ledger drawing over there is by a man by the name of Standing Bear, and that's exactly what he's representing. So again, I apologize for the quality of the slide here, but this is the camp, and of course there's soldiers there, and the Lakota warriors are driving them away, but here's the women and the children depicted here, and the dog, there's even some dogs, and they're fleeing northward when the soldiers are attacking them. I'm going to, again, skip some of the details of the battle to go to this part right here. So later on in the story, as they're, victorious over the soldiers, and the soldiers are lying on the ground, Sitting Bull says, "Washichu tchawoyu hapi wahibishnipo." Don't take any of their things, their possessions. Esha oyate pikin huch nachubishni. But some of the people that listened to him and did take those things. Wo anach unshni oyate kin oblecha hampi. So because of that, the people are divided. Wanayach upishni kin ha kin washichula tchawoyu hapi kin chanti heyaya piktelo ashke. So again, here's an important part of the story that was told certainly within the Sitting Bull family about these directions that he was given, that they don't take any of the guns or anything from the soldiers, but some people didn't listen, and so there's a consequence for that. So then he kind of shifts to talking about him also having a vision that he knew that he was going to be killed. Wichowoyake chesapa el Sloyaye hel ikiela pahawa el Wichowoyake na loaha. So this story took place in the Black Hills at Black Elk Butte, kind of down at the base where Sylvan Lake is located. And that morning, Sitting Bull had gone out looking for stray horses, and he heard this voice up above him in the mountains, right? And he looked up and was trying to see where it was coming from. Cha itkia yahena kiela Ehanni wichashak should be on the other side. Ahaki kda. Unkawan blicha loahe. Unkan wamblit oloan ki lecha ahiaye. So when he sees who it is, it's not a man, right? It's an eagle. And then he quotes the song, like presumably probably sang the song. I don't know the tune, so I'm not going to sing it obviously, but the song says, Ate oyate kilana tchawe makia cha bluha yotie wakialo. So that got him to thinking. Lecha chacha ongalake, and he came to understand or to know what it meant after he thought about it. Chathanka iotake ie ktepi ki ha wambliki he itchachak kta wangalake. Onkale hantuki wambliki mazaska ki elionke. Na mazaska oyate ki gashka awichaye. That eagle is telling him at some point, money is going to be the thing that leads people, right? And that eagle on the dollar bill is the eagle that he saw in the vision that told him that this was going to happen. And that this is a result of that incident in the Battle of the Little Bighorn, where some people didn't listen and they took, some of the soldiers' possessions. So again, it's really interesting to think about from the worldview, right, of the people at the time, and how these kinds of things are not generally told in history books, right? These are the things that come through the oral histories. So I think that's a really, really important one. How am I doing for time? 11:50. You want to do your? Go ahead. She's making me. Anybody want to hear more? A little bit more? Okay. So also in these papers, One Bull shares some of the actual prayers that he heard Sitting Bull say. And so I put 2 of those prayers in here as examples. So this first one is an example from Wood Mountain, when after the Little Bighorn, when the army flooded the Powder River country and they had to flee northward into Canada. And of course, while they were up there, they were suffering from, the cold winter and lack of buffalo and all of these kinds of things. And so Sitting Bull, of course, as leader, is responsible for the welfare of the people. And so he goes out and prays. And so that's what the context of this prayer is. So he starts out in his prayer, Ate ake wa uelo, nishnala wo okie ki oyate, unshi wichayalana, wichayak us ake he on ate, lahan cheyaya, chechichie. Unshi malaye oyate ki nipi chimpi, ptena tachja woite wa mayak uki. Yuha doch doch ampi. Okainja cheapi na kuhunku ki ob kichiglu haha cheapi. Ate lahan ake lahan lecheglala owagalata chachich u. So these are really powerful to me. I really think these are important kinds of things to share with my classes. Ehanni mayanku Ehanni etkiaguha wachinchie Wichiwoyake oyate ob onikdelo atepteki Wichiwoyake kiha wichanikte. Okay, in closing, I just want to talk for a few moments about the songs, because these are really obviously important as well. And again, this is a wonderful resource for those songs. So I mentioned Robert Heigl, who's the interpreter, right, that's doing a lot of the collecting of these stories for Vestal. This is him right here. And he worked with 5 different elders, and obviously singers, to record songs that Sitting Bull actually used, right? These are things that these men remember Sitting Bull actually singing in particular situations. So there are 25 different songs that he collected. Now he's doing it by writing, so we don't have the sound recording obviously for all 25 of them, but we do have the texts for those. So most of them come from One Bull, and a number of them from White Bull, but also Eagle Thunder from Cheyenne River, Mustache from Pine Ridge, and No Flesh from Pine Ridge. Those were the speakers that he worked with to collect these songs, and I'll just share a few of them with you. This is a picture of Shunzicha, Northern Flicker, and this event actually happened about 14 miles from where my wife and I live, along Grand River. He was out hunting and kind of got tired and decided he would lay down under the shade of a cottonwood tree and rest for a little bit. And so he kind of dozed off, and he started hearing a voice telling him to lay still. And as he started to come to, he realized that it was a bird that was in the tree above him. It was a northern flicker. And this little bird was telling him to lie still. And pretty soon he could hear crashing through the brush. And a grizzly bear, right, came out of the brush and came up to him lying there and started to sniff him, and use its nuzzle and push him around. And he just laid still, and then of course it lost interest and it went away. And so as a result of that, he got up and he composed this song to this bird that had communicated with him and saved him. And so the words of the song are Zinkala washte, Wamaya lakin na unshimalaye, Oyate ehawanikte, Chimaya kie, Zinkala kin hokata kia ohini, Takuchia pikte. And from that time forward, he always had a special relationship with the birds, right? And so there's all kinds of different stories that are associated with Sitting Bull and particular birds, whether it be the eagles, like we saw in the story about the eagle, singing that song to him, or other kinds of birds. But this was where that kind of came from originally. This is another example of one of his songs. This one was one that One Bull recorded, and this is a chanted is that song, and so it's one of those society songs that Sitting Bull sang. Kola duana bhachana wia geapicha thamukeshnie nakendula wa. So he's talking about being in battle, and if he were to run off, people would call him a woman, but he's not disposed to do that. And of course, that's not a knock on women. They're calling his manhood into question if he's going to run off, but he's saying, I'm not going to do that, right? So a lot of the songs are society songs. This is another one that One Bull remembers him singing as a member of the Tokala society. So Sitting Bull belonged to like 4 societies at the same time. Makha okawich omawani yalo. Mishnala omawani yalo. Makoche ki pewachila cha pechamuelo. So it's the words of the Tokala, right, saying that he's out there wandering around doing what he's doing as a warrior because he loves the country. And the whites are invading their country, and so that's why he does what he does as a warrior. This is another Fox Society song that he sang. Takomri nawapchit as dueni Wichiwoyake deshni. And if I were to flee, no one would consider me a man. So many of them are these, brave up songs to encourage oneself when you're in battle. This one we did already. From there. So I hope you could hear it. I forgot to bring my speakers. That was a recording made in 1970 of an elder by the name of Felix Kilspredienemy, who lived in the Bullhead community. He was a singer and a tradition bearer, and was asked about Sitting Bull, and that's the song that he shared. It's a song that Sitting Bull sang when they went to Washington, D.C. in the 1880s, when the government was trying to force them to sign an agreement to break up the great big Sioux reservation, right? The Great Sioux Reservation, they called it, into the contemporary reservations of today. And of course, as a leader, he saw that that would be disastrous for the people because of all the land that would be lost. And so he was trying to encourage the people with that song, not to sign that agreement. That is also in the Vestal collection. It was sung by or was recorded by No Flesh. But being I had a recording of it, I used this version by Felix Kilspredienemy. So I know we're out of time, so I'll just say that a lot of people don't realize there were literally hundreds of Lakota songs and Dakota songs recorded as early as the late 1890s, and especially in the early 1900s, that we have. I mean, there's recordings of them, but they've been in these archives for years. And of course, we've been working to bring them back to Sitting Bull College to start with, and then to kind of, publicize them to groups like this, so that people know about them and can get copies of these. The Densmore collection were all songs from Standing Rock recorded between 1911 and 1914 that are every kind of song you can think of, from moccasin game songs to vision songs to every kind of song. And then we also have, for example, the Herzog collection, which are also made at Standing Rock, but here they were working with Dakota speakers from Cannonball, whereas Densmore's were all people from Bullhead and Little Eagle, all Lakota speakers. So just those two collections, there's about 500 songs, right? right, that were recorded. Those last ones were 1928, 29. The earlier ones were 1911, 1914. And there's other collections out there, not just Lakota, but other tribes. So be sure to, to ask around. You might find actual collections like that for your own communities. All right, I know I've gone way over my time. Thank you for attending. I appreciate it. Again, if you want to come up and look at any of Labella's things out here from our Great Race Unit, please do so. I'll be here if you want to answer or ask questions or anything as well.
Oh, I like when I saw the place. I got a few things like, oh, I'm in the head by